Good morning, everyone. Hi, my name is Liz Krueger, State Senator. I think you probably know that if you have found this this web event. So, welcome. This morning is session 5 of our Senior Roundtable series on living well in age friendly housing. Today's topic is older adult housing. We need more. How to advocate for what is needed. As usual, I want to just do some basic introductory remarks before we get right into the program. Okay, so I want to remind everyone that if you are on either Zoom or on, Facebook Live, I think, yes, Facebook Live event, there are ways to um, touch a button and get your what they call, closed captioning arranged so that if you're having any hearing issues, you can read along with the presenters all during this event. So if you're on Zoom, click on live transcript in the meeting controls to start viewing closed captioning. And if you're on Facebook Live, click on CC on the bottom right hand corner for closed captioning to activate the program. This forum is being recorded, and everyone who RSVP'd will receive an email with links to the event video and the resources that we're posting on the chat within a day or two after the event. So don't feel that you have to be quickly writing down notes on everything everyone tells you, because you're going to have access to all of the resource materials we reference and even a tape recording of the full presentation if you wish. I will just highlight that we just finished the state budget in Albany. I spent about 4 months working on it. We were about a month late, but in fact, there are some very good things in this budget that I'm very proud of. So we increased education funding for both our K through 12 system and for CUNY and SUNY. We invested the money into the MTA operating funds that they truly desperately need to keep running and not cutting services, because they took so many hits during COVID and still have some reduced ridership because of COVID and people not actually going back to offices to work. So we had to make that commitment to them. We did some expansion of protections and resources for reproductive health, which continues to be a national crisis, as now 26 out of the 50 states have pretty much outlawed women's rights to decisions about their own body, abortion, contraception. There are even women facing miscarriages who can't get the medical treatment they need in many of these strange states. Um, we also, and I thought was very important, we have also established clear laws about the ability of the City of New York and the NYPD to close the illegal cannabis stores that have proliferated in every neighborhood and are really destroying our goals for a legal, regulated cannabis system in New York. And yes, we made some changes to bail reform that some people are very happy about and some people are very upset about, but it was a hard fought, negotiated set of changes. Also, I'll just highlight that we also were able to get into the budget language, expansion of SCREE and DREE, relevant for today's topic conversation, but now we will all need to work together to get local law done by the city council and mayor, because the options for expanding eligibility are significant, but the locality, in our case New York City, has to now move to pass local laws to implement some or all of these options for themselves. But given the topic of the day, I thought it was very important to highlight this change, and I'd be happy to talk to people who might want to work on the advocacy for that after the webinar, because the language is complex and it needs to be sorted out and explained to our council members and mayor. With that, just a general overview of today's event, which again we titled Older Adult Housing. We need more. That's not a question. How do we advocate for what is needed? That is a question. Many of you on the Zoom today need affordable housing. My staff receives calls every day from older adults who either live in market rate housing, who are receiving significant rent increases they cannot afford on a fixed income, have income over the 50,000 current SCREE limit, or live above the first floor in a walk-up and can no longer manage the stairs. We know that New York City and state desperately need more affordable housing across the board. Today's event will not offer you information about how to access any specific affordable housing for yourselves, but we have wonderful speakers who will tell you about the challenges to creating affordable housing and how we can use the growing number and increasing power of older adults to advocate for more housing. First, we will hear from Kristen McManus, the Associate State Director for Advocacy for AARP New York, who will talk about the state's changing demographics and the potential to use your increased power to advocate for change. After Kristen, we will hear from Rachel Fee, one of the leading affordable housing policy experts in New York State, who will talk about the challenges to creating affordable housing, the specific needs of older adults to live in accessible housing, and for some to have services attached. And our last speaker is Kevin Kiprovski, who is the Director of Public Policy for LiveOn New York, who will provide an advocacy roadmap, including concrete actions you can take to make your voices heard. After the presentation, I will moderate the Q&A portion of today's events. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Kristen McManus from AARP New York. Good morning, Kristen.
Good morning, Senator. Thank you for having me. So I will share my screen here. And hopefully everybody can see this. So I want to talk a little bit today, as the Senator mentioned, about the changing demographics in our state and also the power that it brings to older New Yorkers. So here you can see some data that we have. AARP collaborated with the Center for an Urban Future to take a look at census data over the past 10 years and see how the demographics of our state have changed. And you can see here through the last 10 years, the top number here is New York City. You can see just the astronomical increase of older adults in New York City as a whole, but also the decrease in New Yorkers under 65. So we have a growing older adult population and a shrinking under 65 population. I've also included here the info for all 5 boroughs and the suburbs of New York City, just to give you a full picture. But I want to take a minute and talk about what this means for older adults. A lot of times what we hear this referred to is the silver tsunami or the gray wave or some other equally scary hyperbolic term that I'm really not a fan of. It makes it seem as though people getting older is something scary. And while it is an emergent and urgent need that we need to address, it's also something that should be celebrated. It is a huge public health victory. It is a huge societal victory that we have people who are living so long. And these numbers also take into account the impact of COVID, where we did see impacts on life expectancy, but even still, we have a growing number of older adults. As I said, this is something that should be celebrated, and it's also something that we should be prepared for. Thankfully, all of you have a senator who really is able to take the long view here and do what's needed for older adults. And Senator, I would say that even if I weren't on your forum this morning, but I do think it's important to note that this is strength in numbers for older adults to be able to impact what is happening in our state and in our city and programs for older adults to help them age in place. And that's what we know, that many older adults want to be able to remain in either the same homes or the same communities that they have been living in for years. Certainly a huge part of that is finding and accessing affordable housing, but there's a whole host of other things that go into this as well. So again, we can see here just the huge growing number of older adults in New York City. And this is a trend that we also see over the entire state. Over the past 10 years, people over the age of 65, the population has increased by over 30%, while the under 65 population has decreased by about 2.5%. So these are trends that are true statewide, not just in New York City and in Manhattan. One of the other things that we're unfortunately seeing is that there are more older adults that are living below the poverty line. And there are a whole host of issues that impact this. We all know that everything is getting much more expensive. We also know ageism plays a huge role in this, particularly in job security. When an older adult loses their job, they are much less likely to be rehired than somebody younger. And again, I'll give a shout out to your senator who has proposals that would address that, such as employers not being able to ask for graduation dates or birth dates or other age signifiers to kind of give people a clean slate when they're applying for jobs. But again, this is something that the state will need to be preparing for. Not only is our growing not only do we have a growing older adult population, but also the needs are increasing. And we need to be able to make sure that we're addressing issues of affordability and livability for these older adults in our state. This is I know, a huge wall of text, and I know that you'll be able to get this information sent to you. But what we're also finding is that as the older adult population is increasing, the population is also growing much more diverse. And that brings a whole other host of challenges as well, because as we know, there's impacts not just for ageism, but for racism when it comes to wealth gap and age gap and access to more affordable healthcare and affordable housing, livable communities. So I just want to take a moment here to say, the state and the governor has taken a long view and addressing the needs of older adults by implementing something that's called the Master Plan for Aging. The Master Plan for Aging is supposed to be an all-encompassing view of the needs of older adults, and particularly people who will be older adults. It's supposed to be a plan that will address issues that we're seeing now, as well as issues that we are going to see in the future. And this is going to take into account housing, transportation, access to healthcare, long-term care services and supports, family caregivers and more formal paid caregiving, amongst a whole host of other things, which is great. But I think part of what we need to do is, one, hold the state to task to make sure that this plan actually sticks to what the executive order says that it will do, which is addressing the needs of older adults. But we also need to make it clear that some of the issues that we are facing, particularly when it comes to affordable housing, are issues that need to be addressed now. We can't allow the state to just decide, we have this master plan for aging, and any kind of issue that will help older adults, we can push off into this master plan. We need things that are not going to take several months or several years to be implemented. There are certain things that we need to be able to act on now. And I bring this up just to say, again, we have this growing older adult population, and there really is the strength in numbers, which we know particularly from the voting data. So this is the most recent data that we have. This is primary voters in the June 22 primary. So here we have New York City, but also just Manhattan. And you can see people over the age of 50, particularly people over the age of 55, are the strongest and most consistent voting bloc. And we know that this is true. This is a through line that runs not just for this election, but for every election. And it's also true in what people refer to as off-year elections, although I don't really think elections take years off, and I would guess that many of the people on this call don't either. We know that older voters show up consistently, and I'll say that elected officials know this as well. So they should be more attuned to what their older constituents are asking for, because they know that these are the folks who are going out to the polls. And this is one of your strongest assets. You are politically involved. You are a huge demographic and a very strong voting bloc. So you can see here, even in Manhattan, we have a even higher incidence of older voters who are showing up to the polls. I'm going to stop sharing here just to take away this slideshow, but I do just want to say there are so many opportunities for you to be able to get involved. It's great that you're able to hear directly from your senator on these issues. As you know, you have city council members, you have assembly members, the governor, you have the federal government, all of these people who should be attuned to your needs as constituents, as voters, and as a growing population who really can leverage that to your benefit to be able to weigh in with your elected officials. And that's really all I have today. I'm happy to take any questions when questions are available, but for now, Senator, I'll pass it back to you, and thank you for having me.
Well, thank you very much for being with us, Kristen, and we will have questions when we get to the Q&A part. So now I would like to introduce, Rachel Fee, who's the Executive Director of New York's Housing Conference. Rachel will share information about the challenges encountered to create affordable housing and what older adults need to live well as they age in place. And I know that for many elected officials, when they need to understand what is and isn't happening with affordable housing, Rachel and her organization are the first ones on everyone's electronic Rolodex. So I'm very glad she can be with us. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Senator. I'm really happy to be here today and to talk about affordable housing with your constituents. I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to give a high-level overview of affordable housing and the three levels of government that really impact it, federal, state, and city. So let me just begin this presentation. Okay, so I want to start out by just talking about our housing needs in New York. You all know, and you're on this Zoom call today because we do have a severe affordable housing crisis in our state that's really felt worse in our city and by our lowest income residents. So as you may know, statewide, we have almost 80,000 New Yorkers experiencing homelessness each night. 50,000 children a year. 50,000 children is a point in time, number of children experiencing homelessness. We have crippling rent burdens in New York. Half of the renters in New York City are paying more than 30% of their income on rent, making it really hard to afford other basic necessities, as you all know. And rents are rising. So for people who want to move into a new apartment, it's extremely difficult at this time. The average rent or the median rent for a vacant apartment is $27.50 right now, and that's affordable to households making at least $110,000. And we know the renter's median income in New York City is $50,000. So what's really driving this housing crisis is a lack of supply. And the lack of supply is impacting every segment of the population, but we have seen an exodus of Black families, especially from historically Black neighborhoods. And we also know that New Yorkers are moving to counties outside of New York City and in other states where they're saving about 34% on housing costs if they're owners, and about 19% for renters. So New Yorkers are leaving because of the high cost of housing. So how do the three levels of government fit into this picture? Most of our resources for affordable housing come from the federal government, and they come in two ways. One, through HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and the second one is through the low-income housing tax credit through Treasury. I see my slides a little bit cut off here, but right now we are concerned about threats to HUD funding. I'm sure you're all following the news that there is more fighting over the debt limit. So I am concerned how this can impact the budget moving forward, but I'll just say for households currently receiving HUD funding, there is a threat in the House for cuts, but I do think the Democrat-controlled Senate is really going to protect existing renters who are getting support from HUD. So HUD helps New York City residents in many ways. One is through the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program. Two is through our city's public housing, and NYCHA receives both operating and capital funds. Our code enforcement and emergency repairs for the city of New York are also pretty much solely funded by the federal government through community development block grants. And our transitional and supportive housing is also heavily subsidized by the federal government through homeless assistance grants. And then last, they give money to help build and preserve affordable housing. So the new construction of affordable housing, the new accessible units, that's supported through HOME and the National Housing Trust Fund that goes through HUD, but mainly through the low-income housing tax credit. And that is our main financing tool for new affordable housing. So all in all, 650,000 low-income New Yorkers are assisted by HUD programs. And that includes 9,300 residents for 202 housing, which is focused on for seniors. So the Republicans in the House are demanding deep cuts as high as 23% in exchange for raising the debt limit. I don't think we're going to see that, but that's the fight right now. So what's the outlook at the federal level? Not good right now for expanding resources for affordable housing. Congress is divided, and the pressures of inflation are really focusing on reducing spending right now. So I don't think we're going to see an increase in federal funds for housing, but I also don't think we're going to see deep cuts. The good news is we have real champions in leadership roles. So obviously Senator Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and also the House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries are both huge champions of affordable housing. In fact, they're both coming to a meeting with us in about 2 weeks to talk about New York's federal housing priorities. At the state level, Senator Krueger talked about the state budget already. So I would add that we did have a $5 billion, a 5-year housing plan with $5 billion of capital investment from the state that passed last year. So we do expect new construction of supportive housing and some preservation of multifamily housing and some new home ownership opportunities to happen over the next 5 years. With that funding. And then there was also some additional housing funds this year, including emergency rental assistance. Those are for applicants for ERAP that were already in the queue. There's some foreclosure prevention funds, which will be really important for New York City homeowners, and a homeowner stabilization fund. Housing opportunities for the elderly, help make repairs for low-income seniors. And then I think we also saw the news of what was left out. Governor Hochul proposed a sweeping housing plan to add housing supply across the state, and that did not advance in the legislature. And housing access voucher program, which Senator Krueger has been a big supporter of, was also a missed opportunity this year, which really would have helped with our homeless crisis. So while we didn't achieve everything we'd like to at the state level, I do think the outlook is good. We met with legislators from across the state for the last few months, and every single meeting starts the same way, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, with acknowledgement that we have a housing crisis and we need to act. So I do think that we're going to continue that conversation at the state, and I'm really hoping for more action at the state level. At the city level, Mayor Adams is implementing his housing plan. Right now, the budget negotiations are happening, and that should be finalized by the end of June. For Mayor Adams' housing plan, staffing vacancies continue to be a big issue. And we're seeing impacts the housing plan itself, on projects getting delayed, on taking a long time to move forward. And then also for people who are trying to get into affordable housing through Housing Connect and the lottery process, it's taking a long time to get through that process. So that remains a major concern. And until the staffing issues improve more, I do think it's going to be this lag period between housing production and also getting benefits and housing resources out the door. So the mayor's housing plan is a $22 billion 10-year plan for affordable housing. Because of the staff shortages, they underspent last year, so they're not exactly on track. We're hoping that corrects soon, but we are seeing that impact where we're producing fewer units than in the past. So in this calendar year, only 14,000 units were developed or preserved, and that's almost half of what the city agency was doing previously. So given the challenges of the ongoing migrant crisis, growing homelessness, and mounting evictions, we're really at a place of extraordinary pressure on New York City's emergency shelter system and our affordable housing supply. So just to take a little bit more of a look at the production for the city, you can see that orange bar chart on the far right shows that we're down about 15% in new construction. And compared to the last 5 years, we're down 70% in preservation. So what's the outlook at the city level for affordable housing? It's really mixed. There are some really serious challenges right now. I think if the mayor could turn the staffing situation around and return to full staffing, I think we can make some progress. They are starting to make improvements on staffing at the housing agencies, so we are encouraged by that. But there are other things that would really make a difference, like office conversions, allowing some empty offices to change over to housing, and some other zoning changes that could just allow the city to create more housing. So it's mixed. We're hopeful, and we're really hoping for the best, but we do have a lot of challenges right now. So I know we're going to talk about advocacy and hear that from other speakers, but I just wanted to point out that there are 2 upcoming opportunities. We're a state partner of the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and they have a campaign going on from May 8th to 19th to speak out about budget cuts that are being proposed by House Republicans. So I think this is a really great opportunity to reach out to your local electeds. We put Congressman Jerry Nadler's information on there. He's very supportive of maintaining all HUD fundings, all funding for HUD, and is against the cuts. But it would be great for you to speak out and show your support for maintaining HUD funding. And then there's also an opportunity to testify at the city council. So that would really be an opportunity to share how you're viewing things in Housing Connect, how that's going. I know there was a question in the chat about that, so that could be an opportunity, or if you want to comment on the city's housing plan. So thank you for the opportunity to present today.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Appreciate it. Okay, and we will get to questions after our last speaker, which is how to advocate for more affordable housing. Kevin Kiprovski, I'm hoping I'm saying that right, Director of Policy at LiveOn New York. Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning, Senator Krueger. Thank you so much for having us on, and I'm really excited to follow up on those 2 great presentations. I'm going to share my screen real quick to put up a little presentation that we've put together, so just give me a quick second. Share. Let me know if you guys can see the presentation. Okay, I think we're all set on that. Great, so I'm just going to present it real quick. So today I'm going to be talking about sort of how to bring a lot of what we're talking today to the fore and use our power as citizens, as voters, as community members to really try to push for change. But I do want to start by thanking Senator Krueger and her team, because they have always been incredible advocates for aging, and especially in this budget as well. And today is great evidence of that too, is sort of bringing these resources to you to ensure that, not only do we sort of assist in the process, but we understand what's going on as well. So just a little background. I'm from an organization called LiveOn New York. We represent over 100 service providers in the city, from older adult centers, home delivered meal programs, home care providers. So anything that sort of assists aging in community, we have members in that. We do direct service. We help with sort of benefit sign up. But this falls more in our organizing and advocacy pillars, because we really work to organize communities around these issues and teach people how to advocate for them. So today, I'm sure we all know what we're advocating for. We're advocating for more affordable, more accessible, and better housing for older adults in our city. The next two slides are going to be very text heavy. We don't have to go through all of it, but it's just going to be to set the stage. Both Rachel and Kristen did an amazing job setting the stage already, so I might go a little bit more quickly through this. Housing challenges. So LiveOn has been in the older adult housing business for quite a while. One of the biggest challenges that we saw, a study that we did in 2016, it's getting a little outdated, so we're actually redoing it right now, showed that over 200,000 older New Yorkers were on waiting lists for HUD 202 buildings alone. That's a specific federally funded building for older adults only. And that was almost 10 years ago. And not only are those people on the waiting lists, but they're on the waiting list for 7 to 9 years on average. So this kind of backs up a lot of what we see in the data, that there's not enough housing, there's not enough supportive housing, not enough housing that actually meets the needs of older adults. And then when we do have it, there's far too many people who need it for the amount that we actually have. Also, over the last decade, there has been not a lot of housing growth compared to the growth of the economy in the city. I'm sure that one of the biggest issues that a lot of people find, I worked for the city council for a while, the zoning process and procedures, Senator Krueger was talking about this at the top, are complicated in the city, and the city electeds really do need to understand more of the processes so they can understand how the solutions work. So there's a lot of red tape and confusing processes, both for development and for accessing benefits. And then a lot of times, I even saw in the Q&A in the chat, people talking about the housing that can be accessible is not accessible to people who have, the needs that you have when you get older. So another issue is that when housing is developed, it might not be developed with the particular needs of the older adults who live in our city. I always like to start with the bad news first, because there is good news. It seems like the housing issue is taking front and center stage in a lot of discussions. During the budget, Governor Hochul had a housing compact as one of the key elements. I was listening to a story that analyzed it and said it was the first time in 50 years that this was taken on as like a key gauntlet for the budget. Mayor Adams has been prioritizing housing development, really getting in the weeds on like what development looks like, what it should look like. And next week, we're actually working with Speaker Adams to host a roundtable specifically on older adult housing. So there really does seem to be some momentum in this space. Also within communities, I think this event is also an example of that. There's a lot of awareness of the resources and the need to preserve them and the need to build more housing. And a big thank you to Senator Krueger and team again, because doing events like this to build advocacy really helps to fix the problem. And what we need is continued advocacy by not just community groups, but also residents, individuals, because that's really where a lot of power comes from. Current benefits that are available, I'm not going to go through each of these, but this is really just to show that like advocacy pushes policymakers to fix problems. We have SCREE, DREE, FEPS, shelter allowances, one-shot deals, homeowner exemptions. A lot of these things came from people pushing to solve problems, and now a lot of people rely on them. And a lot of these programs are, fundamental to the way that our city assists in housing and staying in housing, getting new housing. So how do we advocate? I'm going to go through 5 very concrete steps. that you can take the second that you walk out of this or walk out of your house today or wherever you're going, that you can do to push forward more affordable housing, more accessible housing, and better housing for older adults in our city. So these are the 5 steps. How can we make change? First step, stay informed. Second step, vote, register to vote. If you can't vote for whatever reason, encourage others to vote. Third, letters, emails, and calls. Fourth, visiting your elected officials, getting to know them, actually getting FaceTime with their staff in them, having them know who you are. And fifth, stay involved. So we're going to go through each of these step by step. The first one, it's always important to prepare before you take an action. So staying informed means keeping up with the issues that matter to you. And if you're on this call today, housing is an issue that matters to you. Coming to a meeting like this is the bedrock of staying informed. So you're already doing one of the biggest things you can do to sort of help out with advocacy. I've included a map here for a resource that will be sort of put out after the event. There's something called the Beta NYC Boundaries Map, and it's a very powerful tool for people working to get started in advocacy because it breaks down, you can type your address in, and it breaks down all of the sort of political barriers that you live in. You can see your community districts, you can see the city council districts, the assembly districts, the state senate districts. It has every, like you type your address in, it'll give you every elected official that represents you. It'll tell you who, you know, what school district you're in case you have kids or you know someone who has school issues, you can find that out. It'll tell you what your police precincts are, your sanitation districts, your fire battalions. I love maps. I'm a very map oriented person. So this helps me a lot, especially when I'm figuring out, you know, who to contact for what issues, because it could be an issue in my district that I'm worried about. It could be an issue in district I work in. So this is a very useful tool, and understanding the political landscape that you're sort of living in is the first step to understanding how to make those changes. It's also really good to seek out local civic organizations. A lot of times they have established relationships, so it's easier for them to push things. And if a civic organization, you know, you feel like isn't paying enough attention to something, joining and bringing that to the forefront is a great way to kind of push that through. Next is community board meetings. That's always a good way to see what's going on in your neighborhood. Oftentimes they go through the agenda of any sort of public works projects that are going on, any sort of ongoing land use projects, and that's the big one, because land use projects are typically developments for housing or other things. So it's a good way to both get involved by understanding it, and also you can testify at these things. You can voice your support for buildings that you want. You know, you can sort of get your 2 cents in there. And yeah, coming to meetings like this, you know, this is part of staying informed to understand what's going on and how to help. So once you have the foundation of understanding the issues and understanding where you can go, second thing is understanding how powerful it is to vote. And I know that you can't walk outside and vote today, but what's really important to know is that the city council primary is June 27th of this year. And in New York City, the primaries really matter. And because the primary is a month and 16 days away, there's events going on in your neighborhoods where your council member is out there both working and campaigning. So what you can do right after this meeting is make sure you find out where your council member is going to be. Are there community events that are going on that they might be at? I mean, you can check their websites, you can call their offices, you can check their Twitters, because you can go and meet them. And that's what they're doing right now. They're pitching themselves for another term in the council. It's really important that, you know, you get FaceTime with your council members, because one thing I think a lot of people feel, and something that I've seen over the past decade, is this further separation of like people from their electeds. They feel inaccessible. I've heard people say they feel like they can't change anything. They feel like, you know, they don't even know these people. And, you know, that's been something that, you know, as I've been working in the advocacy space, we've been trying to change at LiveOn, because they can be pretty accessible, and they're at their most accessible when they're trying to get reelected. So you can definitely look out your window and see if there's like any events going on for you to be able to meet your council members who are campaigning, tell them what you need. Like, well, while you're chatting with them on the campaign trail, tell them what you need, keep it going on. And also a second piece of this, Kristen mentioned this at the top. people above 55, like 55 to 65, 65 to 75, 75 to 85, are the most reliable group of voters in New York City and in the state and in the country. So there's a lot of power that comes with that. I try to get younger people to vote all the time, and I hope it works. But one thing that everyone can guarantee is people above 55 vote. So that's very powerful as well. And any good elected official worth their salt knows that. So your voice has power because people know that you are members of your community, you know your neighbors, you know your friends, you know your family, and you vote. So it's really important to understand that your position as a voter is powerful. And right now for city things, it's especially powerful because the primaries are going to be happening. Make sure you vote in the primaries. Early voting is a big thing that's going on. We also have ranked choice voting. That's something that's a bit new in the city. So I know that there is always confusion surrounding it, but there's a lot of really good resources out there to sort of go over and explain ranked choice voting. But voting as leverage is very important. If you're not registered to vote, it's very easy to do. There's a lot of resources on that. And if you can't vote for whatever reason, encourage someone you know who can and let them know that it's really important that they register. Third, letters, emails, and calls. If you don't let your public servants know what's important to you, they can't act on it, right? So it's really important to have that level of communication with them. To be able to say that, you know, this elected official, whether it's city council, you know, state assembly, state senate, House representative, federal senator, no matter who they are, you have let them know what's important to you. And oftentimes that is powerful, right? Because if I'm Kevin and I'm sitting and I'm working in a council office and we get 10, 15 emails in a week about something, that puts it on our radar, right? We've even written legislation based on phone calls, just phone calls with, you know, very concerned residents. So like these things really do push the needle. I know a lot of times I've heard from people who I've been sort of working in to sort of like grow in their advocacy that they feel like it doesn't push anything. And like, that's true. One phone call you make about some issue in your, you know, area might not fully change the neighborhood. But I can tell you that it really does start to shift the needle. So even if that phone call didn't fix it then, that phone call put it on someone's radar to really start moving on that. Emails and letters, I would say nowadays, since a lot of the functional pieces of the office have all moved over to computers, emails are probably more effective than physical letters, only because that email inbox, depending on which one it is, every office is a little different, but email inboxes are where a lot of the staff live. So it's really important to be able to just get emails in there, have, you know, email them yourself, follow up, try to get responses. But I would say that the best one are phone calls. I would say getting on the phone with a person is still the most effective way to sort of get your needs heard. So it's really important to do that. It's also really important that you kind of hold the elected officials accountable, right? Tell them what your problem is and ask them what their plan to solve it is, right? If they don't have a plan to solve it, that is okay because you might be the first person to come to them with it. But make sure that you say like, hey, like, can you look into this? And me as your constituent wants to know what you're going to do to fix it. And then give them space to kind of come up with a solution. One really important part about that is to be, and we're going to get to this in the later ones, but to be consistent and persistent. So if you ask them to solve a problem, call them back 2 weeks later and say, hey, have you made any progress on this? If they haven't made progress on this, continue to be persistent, continue to be consistent. And if they never make progress on it, that's where the voting part comes in, right? To let them know you're a voter, let them know this is important, and let them know this is a key issue for you. One piece that we're going to be talking about over and over again is engaging your community. That's actually going to be the entire 5th piece. But the next piece is something that I think can be very intimidating for a lot of people, and it's to visit the actual office of the elected official. All elected officials have an office in the district that they represent. So it's important to use the resources like the map, the boundaries map that we showed at the top, to figure out who your elected official is for what issue, and then to sort of figure out where their office is or what their phone number is. It's good to know your elected official, but it's also really important to know their staff. I think one thing I've learned being on both the advocacy and the elected side is that a lot of times if people aren't able to speak to the elected official themselves, they feel like that's not as impactful. But that cannot be further from the truth. Every member of an elected staff plays an important role in the office and also has an important, there's an advisory piece to that, right? Because if I'm a constituent services director and 10 people call me saying that there's some issue in the district, that's going to be flagged, that's going to be, risen up to the top. It's there. People are going to say, hey, we've been getting a lot of calls on this issue. We need to figure out some way to deal with it. So one thing I always encourage people is like, a lot of times if you call or visit the office, you're probably not going to meet the elected official themselves. And that's fine. That's good because everyone else in the office is also responsible for, laying out and executing the elected official's vision. So one thing we're going to do real quick is just learn about who works in these offices so that if you decide to go and visit your electeds, you know who you're talking to. This one's based on the city, but for council member, it can be any elected official. And sometimes they have different titles, but these 4 kind of titles you'll see across the board. The first one is the actual elected. They're the direct influencer on budget. They're the direct influencer on legislation. So they're the ones who make the actual decisions and the executive pieces. The next is the chief of staff. So every elected has someone who is responsible for sort of executing on the day-to-day, making sure that the engine keeps running, making sure everything keeps moving. If you're ever talking to the chief of staff, oftentimes that gets directly bubbled up to the electeds. So if you are chatting with the chief of staff, it's just as important to tell them everything you would tell the elected official themselves. Many offices have budget or legislative directors. Nowadays, I see all sorts of titles being used, like policy advisor, public director of organizing. There's a lot of different ways to call these positions, but I mean, they function effectively as the budget or the legislative director. So they're responsible for doing research on, budget and items and legislative items, for sort of doing the actual technical work of putting bills in, having discussions with finance staff and understanding what needs are in the community. So if you have a chance to speak to them, that's really important as well, because they're going to be providing suggestions to elected officials based on their research, based on what they hear, and they're going to be doing some of the executing on these things, like submitting the bills, talking to people who draft the bills, drafting the bills themselves sometimes. So there's a lot of power there that's really important to recognize and understand that I'm not talking to the elected official, but I'm talking to someone who the elected official trusts, who the elected official puts their capacity in to help execute these goals. And the constituent services director or the constituent services liaison is also a very important person to talk to in the office, because oftentimes they are the ones who are on the ground. They're the ones attending community board meetings. They're the ones attending, civic organization meetings. They're the ones at community events. So constituent services, the directors or the liaisons, are always collecting information and feedback about what's important in the community. So if you're talking to them, that kind of thing bubbles all the way to the council member and all the way through the legislation, all the way through budget, all the way through everything. So this is important just to know that if you decide to go into your council member's office, assembly member's office, if you decide to visit, Senator Krueger, if you speak to any of these people, they are very important and they will make sure that, your issues are heard. The last piece is to stay involved. It's a 2-pronged piece. The one side is to stay involved with your own community, right? Numbers are power, right? I know for city council elections, oftentimes there's 10,000 people who vote out of the 140 or 50 so thousand people in the district. And a lot of those elections come down to 1,000, maybe even 100 votes. So numbers are power. If you can get 20 people on your side, that's a fifth of the deciding factor in some elections. And that really matters. I think a lot of people just kind of focus on presidential elections. And that's actually, I think, backwards. Because by the time someone is elected to the presidency, they've been elected 60 times already, either, Senate, House or whatever. but the person who's going to be president probably starts as a council member, right? So it's really important to nurture people that you trust and you respect at your local level, right? To start building out a great roster of, New York-based electeds that can then grow into different positions throughout the city, into different positions throughout the state, or different positions federally. It's also important to realize that local elections are incredibly important. City council and the mayor negotiate $100 billion budget that goes directly towards services that everyone here uses: sanitation, fire department, older adult centers. A lot of this is funded through the city. And then the state's budget is $200 billion. So it is incredibly important that the people that you are voting for are people who align with you, so that when they're in the room, they're fighting for what matters for you. So there is no more important elections than the ones that happen in your backyard. Oops. So that's important. And for that, you should get your friends, your family, and your neighbors involved. People say don't talk about this kind of stuff, but this is the only thing that we should be talking about, is telling people, hey, I got the phone number for our council member. I know their office. I have an issue, like we all have an issue with something. We need to call, we need to get it on their radar, and we need to do our work as citizens to make sure that the elected official knows what's up. They work for you. You elect them, your taxes pay them, they work for you. So making sure that you know that, and making sure that they know how to serve you best. That's part of our job in the whole democracy piece. Next is to also be persistent with the elected official's office. So call them, see what they're doing about it. Call them back 2 weeks later, see if they've done anything about it. If they haven't, give them another chance. Call them back 6 weeks later. If they haven't done anything then, start researching candidates. Make sure that you know what they're doing, make sure that you're on their radar, and make sure you're keeping up with them. Another thing we heard from Rachel is the ability to testify in public hearings. Most hearings in the city council are public. There are some that are not public, like there's one for aging coming up on the 15th. That's not a public hearing, but there's one, I don't have the date right now, I think it was the 28th, but we can find that, which will be a public hearing for the city budget as a whole. You can register for that, and you can testify in person or on Zoom. They added that, as a post-pandemic thing, but that makes it far more accessible because you don't have to trudge all the way down to City Hall and sit there for 4 hours and wait until you get called to testify. You can wait in your home. Now, I will say you might still have to wait 4 hours to testify because sometimes hearings go on for 7 hours, but those 7-hour hearings are the ones people remember. Those are the ones that movement happens on, because when 200, 300 people sign up to testify, that's a wave. That's something that cannot be ignored. So be comfortable with the idea of testifying on Zoom, be comfortable saying what you need. I mean, that's your house, right? All of these, legislative chambers are your house. They're the house of the people. They're where the people's business gets done. So the people should be talking more. So be comfortable testifying. And I think the last most important piece is to tell your story, right? Because talking about these things in a vacuum doesn't inspire movement. But telling people why it's important to you, why it's important to your family, why it's important to your friends, really shifts how people feel. There's going to be a link sent out. LiveOn has created this Advocate for Aging cheat sheet that talks about tips on how to connect with your elected officials. A lot of them are what we've talked about today. You can put your council member in there. You can use it really for any elected official, their phone number and their address. You can put this on your refrigerator if you print it out so that anytime you need help, you can make a phone call. It also goes over who the key players are so that you can understand and reference this as you're talking. And that's it. I'll hand it back over to the senator. Thank you so much for the time. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out.
Wow, a lot of information, really, really helpful. Thank you so much. And I will just start out by pointing out what Kevin said about if you can't find me as your elected official or any elected official, absolutely talk to the staff. And I would argue in my office, my staff are all smarter than me. So talking to my staff is even more useful because they will get my attention. And I might learn 8 things every day, but then I forget 9 things, while my staff tend to actually stay on top of everything that people are bringing to my attention. So please, please, please don't think that just because you can't get a meeting with me I'm often in Albany half the year, that I have tremendous staff who help put together this event, but are there every day for different issues. And if you call us, we will find you the right person on staff to talk to, because each staff person has not only their own portfolio, but also, some of them have been around as long as I have, which is now 21 years in the Senate. My chief of staff has been in my office since the very beginning. And we also have like some historical knowledge about issues within the district that also become very relevant. So I want to thank all three speakers. I want to invite everybody to turn their pictures and their pictures on and their mute off as we start to move into the question section. I just want to point out, many of you have submitted questions that were really specific about your own need to access affordable housing. We held a roundtable on affordable housing options earlier in the year, and I'm going to include a link in the chat to that event video, which also includes resources to find affordable housing. So you are welcome to watch that webinar at your convenience and draw down from those resources for getting access to looking for new affordable housing for yourself. But I'll be frank, it's very challenging. There's definitely far more demand for housing than supply. We always encourage everyone to file the applications for every possible new housing opportunity, because it's a little bit like the lottery, even though I hate gambling. If you don't get in, then you'll never have the opportunity to actually win one of these opportunities for housing. So sometimes people get a little overwhelmed. I have to file something on computer, but the answer is, once you've filled out the information once, it's not that complicated to submit it for multiple buildings that might be becoming available that fit the criteria that you'd be eligible for. People also are asking about SCREE and eligibility for that and the desire to expand that. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this Zoom, I was able to slide in some language to the budget that will allow New York City to expand eligibility for SCREE and exempt sources of income that have counted up until now, but it's going to require advocacy by exactly the kinds of people who are my guests today to help get the city council and the mayor to understand these options and use the maximum possible. Because SCREE has always been a program that I have recognized as being one of the most effective ways to help keep seniors in the housing they already have. Because basically with SCREE or DREE, which is the same program for people with disabilities regardless of age, it ensures that as your rent may go up each year, it is actually not your obligation to pay the increases. Your income is, your rent is frozen, but the landlord is able to take a tax deduction equal to what your rent otherwise would have gone up. So it's actually a program that is great for older tenants and people with disabilities, but also no problem for the landlord community because they're getting the increase. They're just getting it from the city of New York, not from the individual tenants. So with any luck, we will all be able to declare victory on an expansion of SCREE and DREE sometime in the near future. And it was very timely that we were having this event this morning, and my brain finally kicked back in after an exhausting month of budget. And I realized as I was going on the Zoom, wait, I got that language in. I have to tell someone about it because they're not going to necessarily notice, because it's not in the housing section of the budget for those of you who like to read budget documents. It's actually in the tax section of the New York State budget. And I will get that to people afterwards as well. Oh, right. So to assist in the search for housing for yourself, I'm also including a link to Housing Connects, which is a portal to affordable housing options sponsored by New York City Housing Preservation and Development. We will also include a link to HPD's Housing Ambassador Program, which provides staff to assist you with your housing search, Although I think, following up on Rachel's point, there's such a shortage of staff at the city government to get things done that I worry whenever I tell someone, oh, the city has a phone number for you to talk to someone. I'm always worried that there's not going to be anyone at the other end of the phone right now, but we're going to include that one as well. And just to remind you again, we'll be sending a follow-up email with links to this event video, all of the resources listed in the chat, as well as the presenters' PowerPoint presentations. So don't worry if you think something got by you or you couldn't write something down fast enough, because you're going to get the real stuff right away, and you'll have access to that as you wish. All right, now I'm going to start in with some of the questions. All right, let's see. I'm just trying to make sure I'm not going to ask questions that I think we've already covered. Okay. Oh, so actually, Rachel touched on this. Are there any plans to convert underused office buildings specifically into senior housing?
So the office conversion really needs some legislation passed at the state level to make that happen. It can really only happen in a very limited way in Lower Manhattan right now. So I think in the future, that's definitely a possibility, but you know, I think it's really a wait and see on how this unfolds. But the office real estate market is, you know, showing real signs of distress. So, you know, I do think we kind of need a path to convert some of these empty offices for housing in the future.
Thank you. Okay, so somebody's pointing out, which I point out all the time, there's a lot of new housing being built throughout the city, particularly in affluent districts. Why don't they ever allocate any number of units specifically for seniors? This person was suggesting 2 floors for seniors in each building. I know my staff and I are constantly talking about the fact that we have enormous amounts of as of right luxury housing going up in our district. We have 421A, a program I've never liked, that actually their definition of affordability starts at levels that literally are impossible for anyone to afford. Meanwhile, tearing down smaller, older rent regulated buildings to be replaced by 421A that no one can afford. So is there something more we can be doing to encourage developers or mandate developers specifically put in units of affordable for seniors in any kind of building complexes?
So the challenge with a kind of set aside in a market rate building just for seniors is federal fair housing law. So we can develop senior housing in New York City, and that happens all the time, but it has to be part of a program that also has services for seniors. So the more common option is 100% senior housing with a service coordinator on site.
I also think on the advocacy side, it's very important that your elected officials know that as they sort of go up against a lot of the forces in development, that you have their back. So it's really important to support them in sort of exploring these options, because a lot of times they have wonderful individuals like Rachel and, you know, others whose job it is to understand this, and they can work with them more closely to really come up with creative solutions. It's not necessarily your job to bring the solution, but it is your job to let them know that, you know, they need to push forward to help you and that you have their back in the fight.
And Senator, if I can add here, I think also one of the issues is not just the availability of affordable housing, but also whether or not that housing is accessible. So there should be more efforts towards universal design, particularly with new construction or tax credits or other means to help people retrofit homes in existing buildings to make it more livable with, you know, no step entry, grab bars, wide hallways, things that make it easier for people to age in place.
Thank you. And actually, we also did a webinar recently on making our homes more accessible as we age and options and resources available. So somebody on staff add to the list of things we're going to share with people. The video and resources from maybe it was the last webinar on accessible housing, either both making your own home accessible and what kind of resources there can be to help you do so. Because I, I think that was a very valuable presentation as well. I know I learned a lot of things there about not very expensive ways to make your home more accessible and legal obligations of landlords to do much of this work for you. And that actually rolls us right into the next question, which was about I'm living on a fifth floor walk up. How am I going to find an alternative apartment, particularly in my own neighborhood? We hear this all the time in my office. People have been living in the same building for 30, 40, 50 years. It is affordable. They have rent regulation or rent control status. They love the neighborhood. They know the neighborhood. Their neighbors are helpful to them in ways that they can't imagine even functioning without the local neighborhood supports they have developed over decades. But realistically, they cannot get up and down these stairs. Are there any protections or any special things we need to know about trying to help someone even just get a lower floor apartment in the same building, perhaps? Oh, I've stumped the guests.
I think it's a really common situation, as you pointed out, Senator, and it can be a really tricky one, especially when you're paying below market rent. So, of course, talking to your landlord and seeing if switching for a lower floor is possible. They're not obligated to do it though, so that might not happen. I also think getting on some of the waiting lists for senior housing, maybe right when you qualify, even if you're not going to need it, then the waiting lists are years and years long. And so that can just be like a good approach, like put your name on the HUD 202 list. You may not even income qualify now, but by the time you need that housing, you might income qualify. And then you're guaranteed to have an accessible unit with an elevator. And I think the same for the housing lottery. Like you're recommending, apply, especially if you think you're in a situation that isn't going to be sustainable for you with a lot of stairs. But it is a really difficult situation.
And thank you, because I do think the importance of planning for your future before you actually hit a wall or a crisis is exactly the right answer. Given how limited we know the resources are, let's make sure we're doing all of this perhaps years before we really think it will become a crisis, so we can actually perhaps get through a lottery or get approved for 202 as we need it. And I will tell people, every once in a while I'm strolling around and someone will say to me, I've lived in the same rent regulated walk up building for years. I just couldn't get up the stairs anymore. I couldn't get into the bathtub. I need a shower. And I talked to my landlord, and the landlord said, "You've been a very good tenant and a member of my community. I will find you an apartment on a lower floor. I will find you an apartment or put in a shower instead of a bathtub. And I will make sure your rent regulated status follows you through with a new lease." And I just want to go and give that landlord a gold star or a gold medal, because they basically were just a human being who recognized that their tenant was also their neighbor forever and was now of a certain age and needed a little more help, and realized that they could do something about it when asked. So they can do those things. And so I don't think it ever hurts to ask. But that reminds me also, if you're going to go into a deal to move out of your apartment to move into some other apartment where you think you have an agreement with your landlord, but you have rent regulated or rent controlled status, you must have a lawyer who's your lawyer. Look at that paperwork and make sure that you are not giving up your regulated stabilized status and becoming market rate in a different unit. So it's a little bit like I'm saying, what amazing people that will do that, but make sure it is an amazing person who's willing to do that, as opposed to somebody who thinks they can trick you out of your stabilized or controlled apartment and move you into market rate. So that's just the little sort of warning about being appreciative, but very, very careful before you actually take those steps to move out of the apartment you live in.
Absolutely. And I just want to point out also, in talking about applying to put your name on some of these open waiting lists, I think everyone is familiar with New York City's housing lottery through Housing Connect, but there's a really great website through New York State Homes and Community Renewal that also lists some of the open waiting lists. And I think you have to check, every few months, go back periodically and see what has opened, because some of those wait lists can be multi-year and they don't open frequently. So it's, a good thing just to go back and check it out.
I do want to just add a small piece on because it's the accessibility piece, but I think the affordability piece is really important. What we see at our organization is a lot of times people don't apply for SCREE or other sort of benefits until it's a distressed state. So what I would definitely encourage everyone to do is check to see what you're eligible for now, even if you're fine. If you're like financially fine, you're okay. Check to see what you're eligible for now. Apply for all of it now, because that will prevent you from getting into any sort of affordability issues down the line. I mean, if you're eligible, it's yours. You paid taxes all your life, you deserve it, and you should get it immediately. So that's just a little note for everyone. Sign up for SCREE now if you can. Figure out all the benefits you can get. Sign up for them now and keep them forever.
Thank you, Kevin. I'll just throw into that because you're absolutely right. People are not signing up even though they are eligible because they don't know about the program, or they think, well, I'm not so desperate now. But it doesn't matter because that rent is going to keep growing, and SCREE is eligible back to the day you apply. So even if it takes the city a little while to get it done for you, right, that you've protected yourself by going and making the application. And we also find very often seniors living on fixed incomes with very high rents are not taking advantage of their eligibility for the federal SNAP program, which is food assistance. And the fact is, for every dollar they have to pay towards rent, that's a dollar they maybe don't have for food. But if you're applying and receiving SNAP, you could be adding another 100, say if you're a single senior, another $150 a month to the amount of money you have for your food needs, as well as your having to spend money on your housing needs. So we also always encourage people to apply for SNAP. It's 100% federally paid for. It's pretty much philosophically the same as Social Security. You paid in for Social Security when you were working, and then you get Social Security back after you stop working and need it. SNAP, you paid taxes all your lives to the federal government, and SNAP is a program that's designed to make sure that you get money back. And guess what? It's a great program for the local economy because there's nothing you can do with SNAP but go and buy food. That means there are more jobs for people in local food stores. There are more jobs for people delivering food to food stores. There's more jobs on farms because when people have money for food, it's a domino effect in their local neighborhoods and in their state economy. So please, anyone, go apply for SNAP. You're bringing federal money home and you're getting more money to feed yourself and your household. All right, somebody's asking about the ERAP program, which was a federal emergency rent assistance program during the COVID period. And yes, we did approve additional distributions of federal ERAP in the new budget. I guess people are asking whether they can still apply if they're a senior. That's sort of a trick question. So we approved that ERAP money could go to people who were in the system already but were waiting to get approval, and then also approved it for people who are in Section 8 housing and public housing who hadn't been eligible for it up till now. So it's hypothetically possible that after going through everyone, Section 8, public housing, in the pipeline, but yet to get approval, that there might be some money left. But right now, I don't think realistically trying to apply if you're not already in that system awaiting an answer is going to be that realistic. But I don't know whether anyone has a better answer than that.
I think the portal is closed for new applications since February.
Yeah. So thank you, Rachel. Rent stabilization, the future of rent stabilization. Well, the good news is when in 2019, when we reformed the law, we didn't put a deadline on it. So it doesn't end. Rent stabilization continues in New York State. I'm not saying changes won't be proposed over time in different ways, but rent stabilization used to be a 4 or 5 year maximum program that would then schedule to die, and then everybody would rush around in a crazy state with very strange negotiations for very strange outcomes depending on the politics of the moment. And so I think one of the very smart things we did in 2019, when my party took the majority in the Senate, was we don't have a deadline. It doesn't drop dead at a certain date and have to be renegotiated. So I think that puts us in a much better place for protecting stabilization and rent control for years to come. I don't know if somebody wants to have a different opinion on that. You're welcome to. Okay.
No, these are lasting protections for renters, which is, huge for housing stability in New York. And I think the, kind of stress year by year is, what's going to happen with the rent guidelines board and how much will rents go up. And I think that's really the anxiety that's in the air right now. And I think with how much costs are going up everywhere, I think we are going to see some kind of increase proposed. I don't think it will be as extreme as the sort of high end of the range that was on the table. But we'll know in another month after, more hearings from the rent guidelines board, what those increases are going to be.
And just an advocacy piece to that, you can also testify at rent guidelines board hearings. Like, making your voice known is very important. So the more people, I mean, the rent guidelines board affects so many New Yorkers, and it's something you really can get a lot of people involved in. I think there was a lot of advocacy around it this year as well. But it's important to get involved because that gets in the news. That puts pressure on people on the board. It puts pressure on the people who appoint the people to the board to know that that's not acceptable to put these things up. So it's really important to try to get involved as much as you can and to know that these advocacy roots exist outside of just elected officials.
But again, to Senator Krueger's point, if you live in rent stabilized housing and you pay more than 30% of your income in rent, you pay 31% of your income in rent, apply for SCREE, because then that takes all of the stress around these rent increases away. You are fixed at that level. So it's just a really important thing to do. Even if you're $1 over that 30% of your pre-tax income on rent, you'll qualify and you don't have to worry about rent increases in the future.
Exactly. Thank you. Just a question that came in from the chat. Are landlords allowed to convert apartments for Airbnb use? The answer is no. And New York City has some very strict laws now in effect with registration of every unit that can be on line on these short-term rental websites, and all kinds of fines and protections. And I would direct you to call up my office to discuss this if you know that there are units in your building that have been taken over and being used 100% of the time as Airbnb units, and we will follow up for you. But more often, it's someone rents the apartment. It's not the landlord per se. Somebody rents the apartment, often a whole group of apartments, often under lots of different names to pretend to hide from it, and then start to rent them out as permanent non-residential illegal hotel rooms. And landlords often don't know about it and absolutely don't want it happening. So also please do reach out and we will follow up on those as well. Because the truth is, we believe that before the city of New York and the state of New York, and it took multiple years through multiple pieces of legislation, implemented a full registration system, that realistically there were 30 to 40,000 units of housing that had actually been taken off the market as permanent residences because they were being used as illegal hotel rooms in a variety of different ways. And we've been fighting that for, oh my God, 12, 13 years now, and pointing out they're taking units that the people who live in the city of New York need to live in. They're specifically targeting, for a variety of reasons, the affordable rent regulated apartments and buildings, where there's less likely to be sort of doormen at the front going, "Who are you and why are you bringing luggage into this building?" And it's really been unbelievably exploitive of the exact kind of housing we're working so hard to protect for people who live in the city of New York. So absolutely reach out to my office if you think this is happening in your building, or there are endless issues, including for older New Yorkers, suddenly having strangers living on the same floor as you that change every 2 days. And hey, a lot of times tourists like to party. So you'll get groups of young people who might rent an apartment and decide they're going to have big, loud parties and drinking in the middle of the night. And you're going, who are these people? Why are they there on my apartment floor? So do reach out. And we have been dealing with these issues for many years, but we have more tools now to solve the problem. Okay, the next question was about reverse mortgages. Can a senior apply for a reverse mortgage? So Wendy, can I ask you to jump on, because you're my expert on reverse mortgages?
So we are still talking to the state about when they would be ready to do a presentation. As you know, the law is on the books, but getting it operationalized has been a bit challenging. So we will follow up at some point with a public event to explain how older adults can go about getting a reverse mortgage.
Thank you. Yes, we did work to get it legalized in New York. So that was step one, but getting clarification from the state on how they would actually approve or not approve different banks or lenders to do reverse mortgages. So if you're in a well, if you're in a rental, it's not relevant. If you're in a private house or a condominium, you may actually be able to get a reverse mortgage. But for co-op, is that right, Wendy? For co-ops, still, we're not at all clear that there's a path. Oops, Wendy.
I believe there is a path for co-op owners. I am not the office expert though, and we will discuss this afterwards and see if we can plan an event in the near future to talk about the details. I will talk about this with Audrey.
Great. Thank you. You're right. Audrey wasn't on the line today. So yes, follow up with us if you have a specific storyline for yourself. And I know we get quite a bit of questions, and we've been trying to work with DFS, the state agency that seems to have umbrella authority over what happens with this story. So we're moving, just not fast enough to get this done. All right, homeless older adults. How do senior adults survive if they become homeless? Well, it's about the toughest story out there. And when people call our office and say, I'm just about to be evicted and I'm X age and I have no idea where to go, I have no family I can go to, I have no other options, it's really sort of the worst issues we face. And we also inevitably, after hearing the story, go, oh, why didn't they call us a year and a half ago? because there were options a year and a half ago, but they're really now they've played out all the options and they're in the situation where they're literally facing an eviction. So, one, if you're out there for yourself or for anyone else, if you feel like you're heading towards eviction, you have been told by your landlord, I'm going to get you out, or you've done the math on the money you're spending and you know that at X date it's all going to run out and you're not going to be able to stay there, don't be in denial. Reach out to anyone and everyone as quickly as possible to see what options there might be for you. Emergency rental assistance, higher priority to find someplace else, legal challenges that might be available to you, but not if the first time you're talking to a legal service or a housing attorney is literally the eviction day. We are always sort of mortified that people are reaching out to us for the very first time at the moment they're being evicted, and your options are so little then compared to if you'd reached out much earlier. So please don't let yourself get close to that line if possible. Reach out and talk to people earlier. Now, the city of New York does have some shelters specifically for older New Yorkers. But to be honest, there's such chaos in the homeless shelter system at this point of time. I'm not even sure at what level they're functioning or whether DHS is going through the effort to make sure that an older person who applies for shelter is going to be correctly directed to a facility that was intended for seniors. So try not to ever have to test that question. Really, try not to ever get to the point where that's going to be the storyline, because again, with the city's situation with homelessness at this point and all of the problems within those systems with the migrants on top of people who are already in our shelter system and on our streets, I am sincerely not sure what kind of response you're going to get, even if on paper there are shelters specifically for seniors. I don't know if anyone else has more and better information than that.
I would just hop on and say that this is also something to really get involved with your community with, because I think we all know people who are struggling. We all know people who might need a little bit of a encouragement to reach out to like Senator Krueger's office. So if you have friends, if you have family, if you have neighbors and you know that they're having issues, please also encourage them, help them get through it. Because I know that a lot of times people have difficulty moving into getting benefits, but as Senator Krueger said earlier, you paid for it. We all paid for it. Like, it's yours, and it's here to make sure that nobody gets into these desperate situations. So this is also a great example to stay connected with your community, help your friends, help your family move into accepting what is theirs already and really making their lives a lot easier.
Thank you. Next question, how do you help Mitchell-Lama residents save the Mitchell-Lama program against semi-privatization push going on currently, and how to learn about and advertise HPD Mitchell-Lama loans to stay in the Mitchell-Lama program? Great question. We did change the law at the state level, I guess a year ago, maybe a little longer than a year ago, which actually made it much more difficult for Mitchell-Lamas to vote themselves into privatization. Although it is true that they still can in certain circumstances. Those are the stories where you're in a Mitchell-Lama co-op, and if enough members of the tenants take a vote and say, we want to get out of the program and privatize, and then they can sell at market rate and walk away with a significant amount of money. The problem is you then pull all of these units out of affordability, which is very disturbing to many of us. So we did change the law, making it much more difficult and building in funds so that if you don't privatize, there's additional money you can get to do the renovations and rehab needed on the building. So again, if you're in a building like that, let us know. We'll direct you to people who are familiar with and work on Mitchell-Lama issues specifically. I just looked at my watch and it's 11:30. Wow. Okay, so of course we didn't get through all the questions. I warned you in advance we wouldn't get through all the questions because there's so many important questions here. But I do think we covered an awful lot of the territory in the actual presentation by our wonderful guests. And again, you're going to get all of their materials. And so I am going to now thank them profusely. Kristen, Rachel, and Kevin, thank you so much for your time. And I'm going to remind everyone that our next virtual event is scheduled for Thursday, June 15th, also 10 to 11:30 in the morning. And that presentation will be for people with hearing and communication and sight issues. And the Center for Hearing and Communication will present during the first part of the event, focusing on new technologies for people with hearing loss, including information about how to assess and purchase much cheaper over-the-counter hearing aids. They're doing amazing work on hearing issues. And also a presentation from the Lighthouse for the Blind will share information about advances in technology for people with vision loss. And of course, we all know that one of the realities of aging is that you can and likely will lose some of your hearing and some of your sight. Although young people who go to too many concerts are also losing their hearing way earlier than that. So I look forward to seeing you all again on June 15th. And again, thank you so much to all the presenters and everyone here today. Good luck. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.